The day a woman walked into court carrying a secret sometimes, history doesn't shift with earthquakes or elections. It shifts with the quiet footsteps of a woman holding a child. This story isn't fiction. It isn't fairy tale. It is a true chronicle of courage, legacy, and the stunning unraveling of a lie hidden behind glass towers and billion-dollar suits. It began on a cold Monday morning. The courtroom was routine. The case was considered a formality, and the inheritance of $500 million was about to be passed to the assumed heiress Vivian Harrow, until the doors opened and Danielle Pierce walked in, holding a baby wrapped in a navy blanket with a golden crest. Her voice didn't tremble, her hands didn't shake. She didn't come with lawyers or headlines. She came with something far more powerful, truth, and by the time she was done speaking, by the time her story unfolded, nothing, not even the Harrow name, would ever be the same again. Because the child in her arms wasn't just a baby, he was the heir, and the empire, it had no idea he was coming. The day a woman walked into court carrying a secret sometimes, history doesn't shift with earthquakes or elections. It shifts with the quiet footsteps of a woman holding a child. This story isn't fiction, it isn't fairy tale. It is a true chronicle of courage, legacy, and the stunning unraveling of a lie hidden behind glass towers and billion-dollar suits. It began on a cold Monday morning. The courtroom was routine. The case was considered a formality, and the inheritance of $500 million was about to be passed to the assumed heiress Vivian Harrow, until the doors opened and Danielle Pierce walked in, holding a baby wrapped in a navy blanket with a golden crest. Her voice didn't tremble, her hands didn't shake. She didn't come with lawyers or headlines. She came with something far more powerful, truth, and by the time she was done speaking, by the time her story unfolded, nothing, not even the Harrow name, would ever be the same again. Because the child in her arms wasn't just a baby, he was the heir, and the empire, it had no idea he was coming. Danielle Pierce walks into court with a baby, and a secret that could shake an empire. The marble floor echoed under Danielle Pierce's heels as she entered the courtroom, every step deliberate, calm, and measured. Yet behind her composed exterior, a storm was brewing. In her arms rested a child no older than one, wrapped tightly in a navy blank, it embroidered with an unusual golden crest that most dismissed as decorative. But for those who recognized it, that symbol was a whisper from the past. A lion's head surrounded by a wreath of flames, the long, lost Harrow family seal. The room stilled the moment she entered. She wasn't on the docket. No one had expected her, yet her presence shifted the energy as if something ancient and long, buried, had been unearthed. She stood quietly at the edge until the judge looked up. "Ms. Pierce?" he asked, confusion thick in his tone. Danielle nodded. "Your Honor, I respectfully request to speak. This child," she said, adjusting the blanket, revealing wide, innocent brown eyes, "is Elijah Pierce Harrow, the only biological son of the late Maxwell Harrow Roman III. Gasps rippled through the courtroom like a rogue wave crashing against the walls of propriety. From the polished benches, spectators leaned forward. On the plaintiff's side, Vivian Harrow, icy and powerful, froze like a statue. Reporters blinked, stunned. Security exchanged nervous glances. Even the judge took a moment to process. But Danielle stood firm, shoulders squared, her voice a blend of fire and grace. "I have proof," she added simply. And with that, the room shifted from a simple inheritance hearing into the courtroom drama of the decade. The Harrow Empire was presumed to have no heir after Maxwell's death 2 years prior. The world mourned, or pretended to, when Maxwell Harrow Roman III, billionaire industrialist and enigmatic head of Harrow International, passed away quietly in his Manhattan penthouse. The media painted a picture of a brilliant yet solitary man, unmarried, estranged from family, no known heirs, no clear will. By all accounts, Vivian Harrow, his niece and closest living relative, was the natural successor. She had the Harrow name, the education, the pedigree, and most importantly, the boardroom alliances. At the funeral, she stood front and center, delivering a eulogy that spoke of business, legacy, and preserving the Harrow tradition. What she never mentioned was family, or the deep loneliness that reportedly haunted Maxwell in his final years. Within months, plans were in motion to transfer assets, restructure the empire, and consolidate control under Vivian's hands. The Harrow legal team declared the estate clean. The media crowned her the new queen of industry, but behind the closed doors of private firms, whispers began to rise, a missing signet ring, a rumored lover in New Orleans. A journal Maxwell had supposedly kept but was never found, and the most scandalous whisper of all, he might have had a child. Most dismissed it as nonsense, until Danielle showed up, until that baby's eyes, Maxwell's exact shade of storm gray, looked up at the judge. And suddenly, the empire everyone thought was settled wasn't. A hidden love story. Danielle reveals her secret relationship with Maxwell Harrow as Danielle took the stand. The room held its collective breath. All eyes were on her, some skeptical, others curious, but none indifferent. Her voice, calm and clear, pierced the silence like a violin in a storm. 5 years ago, Maxwell Harrow came to New Orleans, not as a billionaire or a corporate titan, but as a man trying to disappear. She described a version of Maxwell that none of the board members or society elites had ever imagined. He didn't arrive in limousines or with bodyguards. He came quietly under a different name, seeking refuge from the scandals and pressures that stalked him in New York. Danielle was running her family's modest bed, and breakfast at the time. He was different. She said, kind, observant. He didn't care about my background. He listened. Their connection wasn't instant. It was slow, unfolding over evenings filled with jazz music, long walks under oak trees, and shared bottles of wine on the porch. Danielle never asked about his past, and Maxwell never offered it freely. But over time, walls came down, then came the night of the summer storm. Maxwell confessed everything. Who he truly was, what he was running from, and how tired he was of pretending. Danielle didn't run. She listened, she stayed. That was the night Elijah was conceived. She said, her voice steady but laced with emotion. Gasps echoed. Even Vivian seemed caught off guard. He promised me he'd return once he settled things, Danielle added. He left me with his signet ring and a promise that one day the world would know about us. But he never came back. Instead, she read about his death in the papers, while holding their infant son in her arms. The ring and the letter. Danielle unveils Maxwell's final gifts. The courtroom wasn't ready for what Danielle pulled out next. From her leather handbag, she revealed a small, velvet-lined box. Slowly, she opened it to reveal an object that shimmered with more than gold. It shimmered with history. Inside was a thick, ancient-looking gold ring, engraved with a roaring lion's head, surrounded by the Harrow family crest. The same ring Maxwell Harrow had worn in every magazine cover photo, every business gala, every family portrait. A ring that had mysteriously vanished 2 years before his death. Whispers tore through the crowd, that's impossible. It's the original. Where did she get that? Vivian's attorney stood up instantly. This proves nothing could be stolen, forged, but Danielle was ready. Along with the ring, she presented a yellowed envelope, addressed in bold, slanted handwriting to Danielle, if anything happens to me. Inside was a letter, dated and signed by Maxwell himself. The judge asked for silence as he read it aloud. If you're reading this, then I'm likely gone. I've made mistakes. Many, but loving you is not one of them, and our child, Elijah. He is my legacy, not the company's, not the money, him. Raise him with strength, with dignity. One day they'll question you, show them this ring and this letter, the truth will always rise. The courtroom sat in stunned silence. Vivian looked as though the ground beneath her had shifted. The judge turned the letter over, examining the signature. Real, verified, dated, witnessed. What began as a quiet disruption had now become a storm tearing through the carefully constructed image of the Harrow legacy and Danielle. She sat down, her son cooing gently in her arms, the weight of generations pressing on her shoulders. Yet somehow she carried it with grace. Vivian Harrow strikes back. The heiress fights to defend her legacy. Vivian Harrow stood as if the ground beneath her had turned to ash. Her face was a mask, flawless, elegant, but cracking beneath the weight of disbelief. A courtroom bred on structure and logic was now threatened by something far more dangerous, truth that wasn't hers. She rose slowly, her heels clicking like gunshots across the floor. "This is outrageous," she seethed. "My father never would have consorted with some stranger." Gasps floated like ghosts through the courtroom. Danielle didn't react, but the judge's brow arched at Vivian's tone. Vivian's attorney launched a full offensive. They labeled Danielle a liar, a manipulator, a woman with nothing to lose and everything to gain. "This is a con," he barked, a carefully constructed fairy tale designed to hijack an empire. Danielle remained silent. She didn't flinch. Vivian pressed further, demanding the court treat the signet ring and letter as fabricated. She pointed to Elijah and sneered. That baby could belong to anyone. For her, it was war, a battle to protect her name, her power, her father's legacy. Because deep down, Vivian wasn't just afraid of losing money. She was afraid of being forgotten. Outside the courtroom, tabloids spun wild theories. Social media ignited. Some hailed Danielle as a courageous mother, others labeled her a cunning opportunist. But no matter the angle, one truth had become unavoidable. The Harrow fortune was no longer a closed vault, and Vivian, for the first time in her life, wasn't holding the key. The DNA revelation, Elijah's blood unlocks the Harrow fortune, the judge ordered it. The lawyers demanded it, and Danielle agreed without hesitation. A court-authorized DNA test would settle the storm. Danielle submitted Elijah's sample the same day, calm, composed, even smiling as she handed over the swab. Vivian hesitated longer, demanding chain of custody, surveillance, and every legal safeguard imaginable. Her fear was palpable. For 5 excruciating days the world watched. News anchors speculated. Family biographers were summoned. Some Harrow shareholders began whispering about what would happen if a child inherited everything. Then, on the 6th day, the court reconvened. The judge, now visibly weary, opened the sealed report with practiced calm. He scanned the first few lines, then cleared his throat. According to court-ordered paternity analysis, Elijah Pierce is the biological son of Maxwell Harrow Roman, 3. Probability of paternity, 99. 9%. Silence. Then an eruption, gasps, murmurs, a few claps quickly silenced. Danielle sat motionless, her eyes glistening but proud. Elijah gurgled in her lap as if the storm around him meant nothing. Vivian's face drained of color. She whispered something to her attorney, who quickly began packing his notes like a man fleeing a sinking ship. In that moment, every accusation, every doubt, every harsh word flung at Danielle fell to the courtroom floor like shattered glass. The child no one expected had just become the only rightful heir, and Danielle, she wasn't just a mother anymore. She was now the guardian of a legacy built on power, sealed by blood and rewritten by truth. The final page, Danielle reveals Maxwell's journal and a message beyond the grave just when the courtroom thought the last twist had landed. Danielle stood once more, calm, deliberate, her voice wrapped in something heavier than defiance, purpose. "There's one more thing," she said, reaching into her bag and pulling out an object wrapped in cloth. As she gently unwrapped it, the crowd leaned in, jaws tight, breath held. It was a weathered leather-bound journal, the kind one might find on a forgotten bookshelf in an old study. "This belonged to Maxwell," Danielle said. "He gave it to me, told me not to open it unless something happened to him." She turned to the judge and placed it carefully before him. Inside, the journal was filled with handwritten notes, pages inked with self-reflection, regret, and longing. Maxwell hadn't just run from the boardroom. He'd run from himself, from a life where power had become a prison. On one page, he described Danielle in words that silenced even Vivian. "She's the first person I ever trusted to see the man behind the empire." Another page chronicled his desire for a simpler life, far from the shadows of the Harrow dynasty. He wrote about the joy of watching Danielle laugh, the quiet peace of holding her hand, and, most importantly, the awe he felt the day Elijah was born. Then came the final page, dated mere weeks before his death. "To my son Elijah, what I built, what I broke, and what I leave is yours." 16 words that carried the weight of an empire, beneath them his signature and a notary's seal. The courtroom froze. The judge studied the page. The seal was real. The ink was aged. The handwriting matched verified samples. Vivian tried to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. The board's lawyers looked like ghosts. Danielle remained standing, her hands by her sides. This wasn't just evidence. This was a dying man's confession and a father's final truth. The court declares Elijah the rightful heir to the Harrow Empire. By the time the judge returned from his chambers, the room had changed. There was no longer uncertainty, only gravity. He cleared his throat and addressed the room with a tone that made time itself pause. After review of the DNA results, the submitted journal, and supporting materials, this court recognizes Elijah Pierce Harrow as the legal and biological son of Maxwell Harrow Roman III. Accordingly, he is entitled to full recognition as heir to the Harrow estate and all associated trusts, holdings, and assets. The words landed like thunder. For a moment, no one moved. Then, quietly, Danielle sat back down, kissed Elijah on the forehead, and whispered. He kept his promise. Vivian remained frozen, staring ahead, her carefully sculpted world dissolving grain by grain. The empire she had nearly claimed was no longer hers, not because of legal maneuvering or corporate sabotage, but because her father had chosen something she never anticipated: love. The court erupted outside. Reporters scrambled, phones lit up. Inside, Danielle was offered security detail, a legal escort, and private transportation, all of which she refused. We walked in on our own, we'll walk out on our own. As they left the courtroom, a few reporters shouted, "Danielle, what now? Will you sell your share of Harrow International? Does this change everything?" She smiled, steady and soft. "Elijah may have inherited a fortune," she said, "but what matters more is the truth, and now it belongs to him." And with that, mother and son exited the courtroom, not just as the victors of a legal battle, but as the beginning of a new Harrow legacy. Danielle is granted guardianship and a seat on the Harrow corporate board. The courtroom battle had ended, but the war for the future of the Harrow Empire was only beginning. A week after the verdict, Danielle received a formal summons, not from a court, but from the Harrow International Board of Directors. Most of them had never met her, though they had read the headlines and watched her testimony go viral. To them, she was a wild card. To the world, she was the woman who had changed history by simply telling the truth. She arrived at the Harrow Tower in Manhattan, not in designer clothes or a security convoy, but in a pressed black dress and carrying Elijah on her hip. That alone spoke volumes. She wasn't here to impress. She was here because she belonged. The boardroom, cold and vast with glass walls overlooking the city, fell silent as she entered. An older board member cleared his throat. "Miss Pierce, or should we say Mrs. Harrow as guardian to the heir?" Danielle offered a calm nod. "We are prepared to extend a formal invitation to you to represent Elijah's stake on the board, effective immediately." There was a pause. Danielle's eyes scanned the room. "I'm not here to play politics," she said. "I'm here to make sure my son's inheritance becomes something more than profit margins and press releases. If I take this seat, things will change." Murmurs rose around the table. "But make no mistake," she added, "Elijah's father wanted more than legacy. He wanted redemption, and I intend to deliver it." By the end of that hour, the board had not only approved her seat, they had restructured the company's philanthropic wing, placing Danielle at the helm. The empire, once run by men in suits behind closed doors, now had a new voice, and she wasn't whispering. A new legacy begins. The Elijah Foundation rises from the ashes of the old Harrow name months later. A grand event was held at the Harrow Cultural Center in Brooklyn. But it wasn't a gala soaked in gold and champagne. It was something far more meaningful. The stage was set not for corporate speeches, but for the launch of the Elijah Foundation, a non-profit created to serve underserved children across the country, focusing on education, healthcare, and single parent support systems. Danielle stood before a packed auditorium, business leaders, activists, and families from all walks of life watching her with reverence. Behind her, a large image of Maxwell Harrow Roman III filled the screen. not the boardroom version, but a candid photo Danielle had taken in New Orleans, Maxwell laughing, shirt slightly wrinkled, baby Elijah in his arms. "This was the man I knew," Danielle said, her voice rich with emotion. "Not the tycoon, not the icon, just a man who wanted to rewrite the story he was born into, and leave something better for the one he brought into this world." The crowd was silent, many wiping away tears. I founded this in Elijah's name, not because of the money he inherited, but because of the truth he now carries, a truth that says power means nothing without purpose. Outside, murals of Elijah, hodling with joy, painted in bold color, graced city walls. Inside boardrooms, Danielle's influence grew not by wielding force, but by inspiring transformation, and young Elijah, he was just beginning to speak, to take steps, to reach for the world that now lay at his feet. But unlike the Harrows before him, he wouldn't inherit a kingdom of steel and silence. He would inherit one forged in truth, love, and a mother's fierce determination to give him more than just a name. The mother, the son, and the legacy that was reborn in the end. Danielle didn't walk into that courtroom to steal an empire. She walked in to restore one. She didn't demand wealth. She revealed truth. She didn't ask for power. She accepted responsibility. From the ashes of a dynasty built on pride and secrecy, a new chapter rose, one led by a mother who dared to speak, and a child born of both blood and purpose. The Harrow name, once synonymous with cold boardrooms and locked doors, now stood for hope, justice, and reinvention. Elijah wouldn't grow up in the shadow of wealth, but in the light of truth, a truth his mother risked everything to reveal. And so the story, which began with a woman entering a courtroom carrying a baby, ends with that same child carrying a legacy the world never saw coming, because sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one still learning to walk.